Every board member at the table was staring at the net profit column, nodding like hypnotic pendulums at a respectable 7% return. Only I was looking at the fraudulent signature stamped on the bottom of page 42. My fingers, stained with sugar dust and grease from an 18-hour shift, traced the microprint text of the supplier agreement. As a supply chain buyer for the second-largest logistics firm in Austin, Texas, my entire career was built on detecting discrepancy. A missing invoice code here, a disguised tariff charge there, a decimal point shifted just far enough to siphon off $300,000 over a fiscal quarter without triggering an automated audit. I could dissect a complex cost breakdown down to the fraction of a cent. Yet, at 35 years old, sitting in my beat-up sedan in the scorching Texas humidity, I had failed to spot the glaring, catastrophic flaw in my own life. I spent my days optimizing millions of dollars in corporate input costs, while my own personal balance sheet bled out through invisible wounds. Money was not just tight, it was evaporating. Inflation was running hot at 8%, stripping purchasing power from every single dollar I earned, while the traditional savings account I had faithfully fed for a decade yielded an insulting 0.01% annual interest. I had fallen into the classical trap, believing that keeping cash in a conventional bank was a mark of responsible adulthood. In reality, it was a slow-motion execution of my family's financial survival. My checking account was a sieve. My net worth was negative $28,000, weighed down by the suffocating chain of federal student loans that had shadowed me since college. And then the system pulled the floor out from under my 7-year-old son, Leo. Leo has nonverbal autism. His world is a delicate structure built on predictability, structured routines, and the dedicated guidance of a full-time instructional aide provided through his public school individualized education program. That program was his lifeline. It was the bridge between his overwhelming sensory overload and his ability to learn. Then came the district memo, cutbacks, budget reallocations. With a single cold, mimeographed letter, the school board unilaterally stripped Leo of his dedicated aide, forcing him into a crowded 40-student general classroom. Within 48 hours, his world shattered. The overwhelming noise sent him into violent sensory meltdowns. He stopped eating. He regressed, retreating into a dark, silent shell where I could no longer reach him. I stood in the principal office, demanding answers, pleading for my son's dignity. The administrator did not even look up from her tablet. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice dripping with practiced corporate apathy, "budget adjustments are administrative decisions. You are welcome to submit a formal grievance, but the district board will not review it until the next fiscal cycle in 14 months. 14 months. 14 months in an unsupportive classroom would destroy my son's brain development forever. I needed an education attorney to take on the district and file an emergency injunction with the state Supreme Court. I found the best advocate in Travis County, a sharp legal mind who took one look at Leo's file and guaranteed a victory. But justice under the law carries a brutal price tag. The legal retainer fee, combined with the cost of hiring an independent clinical psychologist to conduct a forensic evaluation of Leo's regression, came out to exactly $18,500, and the hard deadline to file before the court docket closed for the term was precisely 45 days. $18,500 in cash, 45 days. If I missed that 45-day deadline, the court filing would be dismissed with prejudice. The bank would classify my overextended credit as a loan default. My credit score would plunge below $550, freezing my revolving credit lines, and the snowballing interest on my liabilities would trigger foreclosure proceedings on our small starter home. I sat in my car in the school parking lot, the temperature outside hitting 102 degrees Fahrenheit. My phone buzzed. It was an automated notification from my bank. An overdraft penalty of $35 had been assessed because an automated payment for my car insurance went through when my balance was at $12. The breathless cascade of poverty came crashing down all at once. The utility bill for the Texas summer heat spiked by 20%. Student loan interest compounded daily. Raw ingredient costs for my side business surged by 25% due to systemic supply chain inflation. Debt collectors started ringing my cell phone every 45 minutes, and my fixed salary as a supply chain buyer remained completely stagnant. It was an overwhelming, suffocating crush of financial distress, tighter, tighter, and tighter, until you cannot draw breath. To survive, I worked 2 jobs. By day, I managed vendor relationships and input costs for corporate supply chains. By night, I ran a micro-home bakery under the strict boundaries of the Texas cottage food law, baking custom-decorated cookies and high-end birthday cakes in my small kitchen. I worked until 3 in the morning, meticulously hand-piping royal icing onto sugar cookies, packaging them in custom-embossed boxes, trying to squeeze every drop of revenue out of my craft. But under Texas law, home bakeries were capped at a strict gross revenue limit of $50,000 per year, and the soaring costs of butter, eggs, and organic flour had sliced my net profit margins down to a razor-thin 15%. I was running on a treadmill that was accelerating toward a brick wall. The mental burden was a physical weight on my chest. I stared at my face in the rearview mirror, noticing the deep purple circles under my eyes, the silver hairs sprouting at my temples, the look of a mother who was failing the one human being who depended on her for survival. The shame was a toxic residue in my throat. How could someone who managed multi-million-dollar procurement budgets for corporations be so utterly powerless to protect her own child from financial ruin? The breaking point arrived on a blistering Tuesday afternoon. I was taking Leo to his weekly physical therapy at the Austin Rehabilitation Center. Leo was having a severe meltdown, screaming and throwing his arms as I struggled to pull his heavy, specialized stroller out of the back of my sedan. I was exhausted, sweat soaking through my blouse, flour dust still clinging to my jeans from an early morning baking run. As I fumbled with the stroller lock, a metal crate of packaged cookies slipped from my trunk and shattered on the asphalt, scattering 50 hours of work into the dirt. I dropped to my knees on the hot concrete, picking up the broken sugar cookies, and I finally broke. The tears came, scalding and uncontrollable. "Need a hand with that chassis alignment, young lady?" I looked up through blurred vision. Standing beside a hydraulic lift at the center loading dock was an elderly man wearing oil-stained navy coveralls with thick wire-rimmed glasses, silver hair tucked under a faded baseball cap, and hands that were thick, calloused, and covered in engine grease. This was Arthur, a 68-year-old retired mobility equipment maintenance mechanic who worked part-time servicing specialized wheelchairs for the facility.
I tried to wipe my face, swallowing my embarrassment. "I am fine," I stammered, picking up the ruined boxes. "It is just everything is breaking at the same time." Arthur did not offer cheap pity. Instead, his sharp eyes scanned the back of my car. He did not look at the tears. He looked at the organization inside my trunk. He saw the color-coded plastic bins, the custom thermal insulation sleeves, the hyper-optimized spatial arrangement that allowed me to fit 300 baked goods into a compact sedan without crushing a single piece of delicate icing. "You build systems," Arthur said, his voice a calm, gravelly baritone that commanded immediate attention. "Look at this trunk space. You're applying high-density volumetric efficiency to a low-margin retail product. You've got a precision engine in your head, girl, but you're burning kerosene in a Formula One race car." I wiped my nose with the back of my hand, caught off guard by his analysis. "I am a supply chain buyer," I muttered, "and I bake.
But none of it matters. I need $18,500 in 45 days to hire a lawyer for my son, or he loses his education. And I'm already maxed out. I'm drowning in debt. Inflation is eating my paycheck, and my bank account is a joke." Arthur leaned against the frame of a heavy motorized wheelchair, wiping his greasy hands on a red shop rag. "Let me tell you a secret about banks," Arthur said, quietly, looking me dead in the eye. "A traditional bank account is not a vault built to protect your wealth. It's a storage locker where they keep your cash under vacuum seal while they dilute its purchasing power to fund their own asset portfolios. You're trying to solve an exponential crisis using a linear arithmetic mindset. You think working harder for active income will save you. It won't. Active income gets taxed at the highest bracket, devoured by inflation, and capped by the physical hours in your day." He reached into the chest pocket of his coveralls and pulled out a worn, leather-bound pocket ledger filled with handwritten charts, financial diagrams, and dense columns of numbers. "If you want to raise $18,500 in 45 days without going into high-interest debt or filing for bankruptcy," Arthur said, "you don't need a second job. You need a 3-stage cash flow architecture. You need to stop selling your labor by the hour and start packaging your operational expertise into scalable B2B structures." I stared at him, my heart pounding in my throat. "B2B? I sell $6 cookies to neighborhood moms." "That's why you're broke," Arthur replied bluntly. "A neighborhood mom negotiates over 50 cents. A corporate HR manager with a $10,000 employee recognition budget cares about speed, compliance, and flawless execution." He flipped open his ledger, revealing a series of meticulously drawn financial models. Arthur laid out the 3-stage system that had allowed him, on a mechanic wage, to build an indestructible net worth. Stage 1 was short-term active cash flow restructuring. I had to immediately pivot my home bakery away from low-margin direct-to-consumer sales. Instead of selling individual birthday cakes under the restrictive cottage food limits, I needed to leverage my supply chain skills to pitch high-end, recurring corporate subscription packages, B2B event catering for tech firms, quarterly employee appreciation cookie boxes, and white-label pastry supplies for private schools that were not bound by the same retail price ceilings. Stage 2 was debt and budget velocity allocation, specifically utilizing the debt snowball method paired with zero-based cash allocation. Every single dollar generated from the active cash flow pivot had to be bifurcated, 70% directed like a battering ram toward the $18,500 legal retainer requirement, while 30% was locked into an untouchable reserve to maintain operational liquidity. Stage 3 was long-term wealth preservation and asset allocation. Arthur turned a page in his ledger to reveal a diagram of a mechanical system alongside a financial chart. He explained that cash is merely a medium of exchange, an unstable utility that decays over time. Real wealth, he argued, requires converting transient cash flow into hard, physical, inflation-hedged assets. His asset of choice, which he had accumulated silently for 40 years through dollar-cost averaging, was physical gold bullion held outside the fragile fractional reserve banking system. "Cash is water," Arthur said, tapping the page. "It evaporates if you leave it in the sun. Physical asset allocation is steel. You build your fortress with steel, not water. And to feed that asset allocation, you need an automated low-overhead utility that generates passive cash flow day and night." He pointed to a rough technical sketch in his book. It was a design for a specialized automated wheelchair washing and disinfection station, a compact, high-pressure, medical-grade cleaning unit designed to be placed at the entrance of rehabilitation centers, nursing homes, and VA hospitals. Facilities were desperate for automated sterilization systems to meet stringent state health regulations, but off-the-shelf medical equipment cost $50,000 per unit. Arthur had engineered a simplified, modular prototype using industrial car wash components that could be built for a fraction of the cost and operated coin-free or via digital payment, generating continuous, high-margin, passive cash flow. I looked at the diagrams, then at Arthur, then at the broken cookies scattered across the hot asphalt. It sounded brilliant, but it also sounded completely impossible. I was a single mother with an overdrawn checking account and a ruined credit score. How was I supposed to build an industrial sterilization unit and pitch corporate clients while working a 60-hour week and caring for an autistic child? I thanked Arthur politely, gathered my broken boxes, and drove home. I took the leather-bound notes he offered me, tucked them deep inside the glove compartment of my sedan, and tried to forget about it. It felt like a fantasy, a pipe dream from a retired mechanic who didn't understand the crushing reality of my immediate bills. For 10 days, I tried to do things my way. I worked longer hours. I slept 3 hours a night. I took on every individual cake order that came through my phone. I begged my bank for a personal loan, but my application was instantly rejected due to my high debt-to-income ratio and falling credit score. I asked my regional manager at work for an emergency advance on my salary. He laughed softly and reminded me that corporate policies strictly prohibited cash advances to mid-level personnel. My co-workers at the logistics office saw my deteriorating condition and offered cynical advice. "Just file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, Brandy," one senior planner whispered to me over the break-room coffee pot. "It wipes the slate clean. Sure, it destroys your credit score for 10 years. They take your assets, and you won't be able to buy a car, but at least the phone calls stop." I refused to accept that death sentence. Chapter 7 was not a solution. It was a white flag that would freeze me out of the financial system indefinitely. Then came the first major catastrophe. Desperate to hit my revenue targets, I accepted a massive 30-box catering order for a regional family reunion. In my rush to deliver, I failed to print the required Texas cottage food compliance disclaimer on the bottom of the individual packaging labels, a mandatory legal notice stating the food was produced in an uninspected home kitchen. A competitor reported my account to the state health inspector. 2 days later, a formal warning letter arrived in my mailbox, along with an immediate $800 regulatory fine. $800 swept away in a second, money that was supposed to go directly into my legal retainer fund. I sat in my car in the driveway that night, the engine turned off, the house dark. Leo was asleep inside with a babysitter I could barely afford. The oppressive Texas heat settled over the vehicle like a heavy, suffocating blanket. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and sobbed until my throat burned. I was out of time, out of money, and out of options. On day 20, I had managed to save a paltry $2,000. I was $16,500 short of the legal retainer, and the clock was ticking down with terrifying speed. I reached out with a trembling hand and popped open the glove compartment. I pulled out Arthur's leather-bound notebook. I flipped through the yellowed pages, reading his precise, methodical handwriting. I stopped at his notes on the Stage 1 cash flow pivot. He had written, "Crisis strips away the luxury of fear. Stop acting like a producer looking for permission. act like an architect designing an absolute outcome. The next morning, at 6 in the morning, I executed the strategy. I did not bake a single individual cookie that day. Instead, I used my supply chain knowledge to conduct a forensic analysis of the local Austin business market. I identified 15 mid-sized technology firms, corporate law practices, and commercial real estate brokerages in the downtown area that had corporate wellness programs, employee recognition budgets, and client appreciation allocations. I drafted a formal B2B service contract, not a menu of pastries, but a structured corporate hospitality subscription agreement. I offered custom-branded gourmet executive gift boxes delivered weekly, complete with nutritional compliance documentation, high-end sustainable packaging, and guaranteed delivery schedules. I priced the service not by the piece, but as a recurring monthly retainer of $1,200 per company. I walked into the executive offices of a mid-sized software firm in downtown Austin, wearing my best tailored suit, holding a professionally bound proposal portfolio and a sample box of precision-crafted cookies decorated with their exact corporate logo. I did not ask to speak to the kitchen manager. I asked for the director of human resources and corporate culture. When she met me in the lobby, I did not present myself as a tired mom baking out of her kitchen. I spoke the cold, analytical language of enterprise operations. I am offering an end-to-end employee retention and client engagement utility, I told her, placing the proposal on the glass table. By outsourcing your internal event catering and client appreciation touchpoints to my subscription model, you eliminate procurement overhead by 15% while increasing employee satisfaction metrics. We handle compliance, customization, and logistics under a single line item invoice. She looked at the proposal, tasted a sample, and looked at me. This solves 3 immediate vendor friction points we have been dealing with all quarter, she said. Can you fulfill 300 custom units by Friday? If we execute the contract today, I replied, without blinking, delivery is guaranteed at 8 in the morning on Friday. She signed the contract on the spot. A $1,200 recurring monthly retainer with a 50% upfront deposit of $600 paid directly into my newly structured business checking account. By the end of that week, through sheer relentless persistence and enterprise positioning, I signed 4 corporate clients. Cash flow began to move. But the timeline was relentless, and the numbers were still stacked heavily against me. By day 30, through relentless day and night production, sleeping only 2 hours between my corporate buyer job and my commercial baking shifts, I had managed to accumulate $11,000 in my legal retainer fund. I was $7,500 away from the target. The light at the end of the tunnel was finally beginning to flicker. Then, the universe struck a crushing blow. At 2 in the morning on the 31st day, while I was running a massive batch of custom cookies for my largest tech client, an order worth $3,000 in immediate cash flow, a sharp, mechanical metallic screech echoed through my kitchen, followed by a loud bang. Smoke instantly poured from the main heating element of my commercial-grade convection oven. An electrical short circuit had blown the main control board, igniting the internal heating coils. I grabbed the fire extinguisher and sprayed the unit, extinguishing the flames, but the damage was absolute. The entire $3,000 order was ruined, coated in chemical fire retardant. The oven, my primary asset, my sole engine for generating active cash flow, was completely destroyed. Its internal wiring melted into an unsalvageable mass. I stood in the middle of my smoke-filled kitchen, the acrid smell of burnt plastic and chemical foam filling my lungs. I looked at the clock on the wall. At 8 in the morning, my phone rang. It was my education attorney. "Brandy," he said, his voice flat and grave. "The school district legal team just filed a motion to dismiss our administrative appeal, citing procedural delays. The judge granted an expedited hearing. The court has moved our filing deadline up. We no longer have 15 days. If we do not submit the full $18,500 retainer and the expert witness evaluation by 4 o'clock in the afternoon on day 37, the case is closed permanently. Leo will remain in the general environment for the remainder of his academic career." 7 days left. $7,500 short. A destroyed main production engine, a ruined $3,000 order, and an accelerated legal deadline that cut my remaining time in half. I dropped the phone onto the floor. The silence in the kitchen was absolute, save for the slow, rhythmic dripping of melted plastic from the ruined oven door. I sank down onto the floor, surrounded by chemical dust and black soot, and buried my face in my hands. The dark moment had arrived, absolute and terrifying. I was completely bankrupt, stripped of my assets, out of time, and staring directly into the abyss of total failure.
The acrid stench of burnt insulation and chemical fire retardant hung thick in the air, settling into the pores of my skin. I lay on the cold kitchen tile, staring at the soot-stained ceiling, listening to the rhythmic ticking of the cooling metal inside my ruined convection oven. It was 2:30 in the morning. 7 days remaining, $7,500 missing, a ruined $3,000 corporate order, an accelerated court deadline that threatened to seal my son's developmental fate forever. Every rational voice in my head, the voice of corporate risk management, the voice of exhausted self-preservation, the voice of my doubting coworkers, screamed at me to surrender. File Chapter 7. Accept the public school assignment. Take the loss. You are just a single mother working a desk job. You cannot beat a city public school district with unlimited legal retainers. I closed my eyes, and for a fleeting moment, the quiet temptation of giving up felt like relief. But then I heard the soft, rhythmic hum from the hallway. Leo. He was up, standing in his doorway, clutching his faded blue blanket, rocking back and forth silently in the dim lighting. He didn't understand retainers, court dockets, or supply chain bottlenecks. He only knew that his world had turned into chaotic noise, and he was waiting for his mother to fix it. I wiped the black soot from my face with the sleeve of my shirt, pulled myself off the floor, and grabbed a flashlight. Crisis strips away the luxury of fear. I pulled open the scorched door of the industrial convection oven. I didn't see a ruined kitchen appliance anymore. I forced myself to see what Arthur saw, a collection of mechanical subassemblies. I pulled out Arthur's leather-bound ledger out of my bag and laid it under the flashlight beam. I flipped directly to the mechanical schematics for his low-cost wheelchair washing and disinfection station. My heart began to race, calculating the mechanical equivalencies at light speed. The structural blueprint of Arthur's modular sanitation unit relied on 3 primary components: a high-pressure fluid displacement pump, a thermal fluid heating loop, and a heavy-duty rotary spray assembly. The exact core components sitting intact inside my broken $3,000 convection oven. I wasn't just looking at a broken baking tool. I was sitting on the primary mechanical engine for an entirely different, high-margin asset model. At 6 o'clock in the morning, I didn't call an oven repair technician. I drove directly to an industrial machinery salvage yard on the outskirts of East Austin. Using my credentials as a corporate supply chain buyer, I negotiated access to their commercial scrap inventory. For $400, nearly half of my remaining liquid cash reserves, I purchased 2 discarded stainless steel food processing enclosures, a set of industrial rubber seals, and a commercial digital payment module scrapped from a defunct car wash system. I hauled the components back to Arthur's small home workshop behind the rehabilitation center. When the elderly mechanic walked in at 7 in the morning, coffee mug in hand, he found me standing over his workbench with grease on my forehead, his ledger open beside a fully laid out array of disassembled mechanical parts. "I don't have time to bake $3,000 worth of cookies, Arthur," I said, my voice crisp, flat, and entirely devoid of panic. "The court moved the deadline. I have 7 days to produce $7,500. I am going to build your automated wheelchair sanitation prototype right now." Arthur looked at the schematics laid out on his bench, then at the repurposed oven motor, then at me. A slow, quiet grin spread across his weather-beaten face. "Now you are thinking like an engineer of capital," he said. We worked for 36 hours without sleep. Using my supply chain expertise, I streamlined the assembly process, cutting manufacturing time in half by replacing custom-machined brackets with standardized off-the-shelf industrial conduit clamps. Arthur handled the heavy welding and hydraulic line integrations, while I wired the control circuits, integrated the digital credit card processing module, and calibrated the high-temperature sanitation cycles to meet Texas Department of Health infection control standards. By noon, on day 33, the prototype stood in Arthur's workshop, a sleek, compact, brushed stainless steel kiosk capable of executing a complete medical-grade wheel and frame wash, steam sterilization, and rapid blow-dry cycle on a motorized wheelchair in exactly 4 minutes. Total unit build cost, $1,200 in salvaged parts and sweat equity. Market value of comparable medical sterilization units, $48,000. Now came the real test. We didn't have weeks to market the device to municipal buyers. I needed immediate, high-volume operational validation and upfront cash deployment. I drove straight to the administrative offices of the Austin Rehabilitation Center. I didn't ask to meet with facility maintenance. I requested an emergency meeting with the Chief Operating Officer and the Director of Risk Management, bringing a formal pilot program proposal drafted on my corporate supply chain letterhead.
When I stepped into the executive boardroom, I set down a single printed sheet containing a forensic cost analysis of their current operational workflow. "Gentlemen," I said, launching into a sharp, methodical pitch, "your facility processes 250 outpatient mobility devices per week. Your staff currently sanitizes these wheelchairs by hand using chemical wipes, consuming an average of 12 minutes per unit in manual labor. That equates to 50 staff hours per week in direct operational overhead, costing your facility roughly $62,000 annually in wasted labor, while still leaving you exposed to regulatory compliance fines during state health audits." The COO leaned forward, squinting at the spreadsheet. "What are you proposing, Mrs. Vance?" "I am offering an immediate operational solution under a B2B equipment-as-a-service model," I stated calmly. "I will install 2 fully automated self-contained wheelchair sanitation stations in your primary transport pays today at 0 capital expenditure to your facility. In exchange, the facility signs a 12-month service contract paying a flat operational fee of $2 per sanitized unit, or your patients and visitors can utilize the system independently via automated digital payment at $5 per cycle." The Director of Risk Management looked at the state compliance certification documents I had pre-drafted and attached to the file. "How quickly can these units be operational?" "They are loaded on the back of my truck right now," I replied. "But to lock in this pilot deployment rate, I require a 50% upfront service retainer and advance site licensing deposit of $10,000 upon signature." The room went completely still. The COO looked at the risk analyst, then back at the financial projections on the table.
The math was indisputable. The automated system would save their facility over $30,000 in direct labor costs in the first year alone, while completely eliminating state audit liability. "Print the contract," the COO said. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon on day 34, the ink dried on the master service agreement. A wire transfer of $10,000 cleared into my business bank account instantly. I stood in the parking lot of the rehabilitation facility, watching the digital banking app on my phone refresh. Account balance, $18,920. The relief didn't hit me as an emotional breakdown. It hit me as a profound, crystal-clear shift in perception. The financial system was no longer a terrifying, chaotic monster waiting to crush my family. It was a game of rules, leverage, and structural engineering. I drove directly to my education attorney's office in downtown Austin. I didn't just hand him a cashier's check for the $18,500 retainer. I delivered a bound evidence folder containing the completed forensic psychological evaluation of Leo's educational regression, certified by the top independent specialist in the state. On day 37, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we walked into the Texas State Supreme Court Administrative Chamber. The school district's corporate attorney sat at the opposing table, wearing smug, relaxed expressions, fully expecting my legal counsel to request a desperate continuance or withdraw the suit due to a lack of funding. My attorney stepped up to the bench and submitted our filing backed by the fully funded legal retainer and unassailable clinical documentation. He delivered a blistering surgical opening statement detailing the district's willful violation of federal special education mandates. The lead attorney for the school district looked over at our table, his eyes locking on the certified bank draft and the heavy stack of expert witness retainers attached to the docket. The smug expression vanished from his face. They had counted on my poverty to force a default judgment. They had calculated that a single mother working a mid-level supply chain job would shatter under the weight of an $18,000 barrier to entry. They had miscalculated. 20 minutes later, before the judge could even issue a formal ruling, the district legal team asked for a temporary recess. They met us in the hallway outside the courtroom and signed a binding administrative settlement. Leo was immediately restored to his full-time, dedicated instructional aide. The district agreed to fund his specialized therapy program retroactively, and all legal fees were ordered to be reimbursed by the public school system upon final review. We won. Absolute, unconditional victory. When I walked out of the courthouse into the bright Texas afternoon sun, the heavy, suffocating band that had wrapped around my chest for years simply snapped. I leaned against a stone pillar, looked up at the sky, and took the first deep, full breath of air I had taken in months. But I knew this was not the end of the journey. Solving an immediate financial emergency is merely survival. Building immunity against future crises is true freedom. I didn't take the settlement funds or the new cash flow from the B2B contracts and return to my old habits. I didn't dump the money back into a traditional savings account to let high inflation erode its value. I executed Stage 2 and Stage 3 of Arthur's wealth preservation framework with absolute discipline.
First, I implemented the debt snowball strategy. Using the initial cash flow generated from the corporate bakery subscription contracts and the rehabilitation center licensing fees, I systematically attacked my liabilities. I paid off my high-interest credit card debts first, wiping out $300 a month in useless finance charges. Then I targeted my $28,000 student loan balance. Within 6 months of aggressive, structured cash flow allocation, my total personal debt was reduced to 0. My credit score, which had hovered in the dangerous sub-550 zone during the peak of my crisis, surged upward like a rocket. stabilizing at a prime rating of 740. Second, I secured my short-term liquidity. I built a dedicated 6-month emergency fund of $8,000, keeping it locked in a high-yield liquid account strictly reserved for unforecasted operational shocks. Third, I established my long-term financial citadel. Following Arthur's core philosophy of inflation-hedged capital preservation, I began executing a systematic dollar-cost averaging strategy. Every month, exactly 25% of the passive cash flow generated by the growing network of wheelchair sanitation stations, which had expanded to 4 regional facilities across Central Texas, was converted directly into allocated physical gold bullion. I didn't buy paper gold ETFs or speculative digital assets. I bought physical gold coins and bars with high-purity certificates, placing them into an independent, non-bank secure vault storage system. While the central bank continued to print currency and inflation devoured the purchasing power of the average worker's paycheck, my net worth was anchored in real, tangible, indestructible physical assets that held intrinsic value across centuries. 1 year after that dark night in my smoke-filled kitchen, I sat across from Arthur at a small wooden table outside his favorite diner in South Austin. The afternoon air was warm, but I didn't feel the phantom weight of financial anxiety anymore. I opened my briefcase and laid a single document on the table in front of the retired mechanic. It was a formal partnership agreement for Vance and Arthur Sanitation Systems, LLC, along with a dividend check reflecting his 30% equity share in the business, a passive income payment of $4,500 for the quarter. Arthur picked up the check, looked at it through his thick glasses, and let out a soft, low chuckle. "Not bad for a girl who used to cry over broken sugar cookies in a parking lot," he said. I smiled, taking a sip of my iced tea. "I wasn't crying over the cookies, Arthur. I was crying because I thought the system was rigged against me." "It is rigged against you," Arthur replied, leaning back in his chair and tapping his knuckles on the table. "The economic machine is engineered to keep linear earners trapped on a hamster wheel of high-interest debt, stagnant wages, and silent inflation taxes. The secret is that the machine runs on predictable mechanics. Once you understand how to read the blueprint, you stop playing their game and you start building your own infrastructure." I looked down at the figures on my master asset summary statement. My net worth stood at $42,000 in pure hard equity, completely unencumbered by debt. My primary income no longer depended on selling 40 hours of my life every week to a corporate employer. It was powered by a diversified portfolio of active corporate subscription accounts, passive operational equipment assets, and an expanding bedrock reserve of physical gold bullion. Leo was thriving. With his dedicated aide back by his side at school, his sensory meltdowns had ceased, his vocabulary was expanding, and every afternoon when I picked him up, he greeted me with a calm, happy smile that no amount of money could ever purchase. Financial crisis does not appear in your life to destroy you. It appears as a brutal, unforgiving audit of your current operating system. It arrives to tear away the comfortable illusions of job security, conventional banking promises, and linear effort, forcing you to repackage your true high-value capabilities. When you learn to stop selling your time by the hour, when you deploy your technical skills into scalable B2B cash flow engines, and when you systematically convert your liquid profits into physical inflation-proof assets, you do not just survive the storm, you build a financial citadel that no economic shift, no corporate layoff, and no bureaucratic system can ever tear down.